Much like Peter Jackson was pulled back in to do The Hobbit, so am I. Although unlike Mr. Jackson, I wasn't forced on borderline blackmail, so that's nice, I suppose. LEGO The Hobbit continues the LEGO tradition of adapting recent movies, and very much follows in the footsteps of and copies most of the homework of its predecessor, LEGO The Lord of the Rings. LEGO The Hobbit adapts both the first and second movies, An Unexpected Journey and the Desolation of Smaug. You may be wondering about the Battle of Five Armies, the third movie, and honestly, the same. The game released in mid-2014, a bit after the Desolation of Smaug, but a bit before the Battle of Five Armies, and I guess Warner Brothers didn't want to spoil a 80-year-old book. On release, Five Armies was announced as DLC, but the plans were dropped for vague reasons, and Warner Bros. Rights to make the game would eventually expire. I largely suspect that the core audience of these games skewed too young, honestly, that getting $15 or $20 out of them for the levels would be too difficult to recuperate the losses, and that it was seen as best to just move on to the next LEGO game. LEGO The Hobbit is the first of these games to feel very obviously made for the 7th generation consoles, with lots of polish and graphics that are an obvious notch above what was possible before, although as with all these games, it came out to the prior gen stuff as well, releasing on PlayStation 3, 4, and the Vita, Xbox 360 and One, the Switch, and PC with a pared down version on the 3DS. Much of what I said in the LEGO The Lord of the Rings video still applies to LEGO The Hobbit. The game consists of 16 linear levels, 8 for each movie, which surprisingly doesn't feel like too much stretching, thanks to these movies being dense and cluttered. And in each level, you use a diverse cast of characters with unique abilities to do some action platforming puzzles, with a slight lean towards the action. In general, the game has a bit of character clutter, given the party of 13 dwarves, some of which are pretty hard to tell apart from one another, plus Bilbo, who, while standing out more, is also short, as well as Gandalf pretty frequently, which can make selecting characters for specific situations more than a little unwieldy. This is also kind of a problem in LEGO The Lord of the Rings, but there's very few levels that have the whole party together. In that game, there's a lot that have them all together in this one. The levels are quite good in general, maybe the best in the series so far alongside something like LEGO Star Wars 3, which is really nice to see. Lots of spectacle and set pieces. As with Lord of the Rings, each level has 10 mini-kits, which are just for getting mithril bricks, 4 treasures for completion, as well as item plans, which can be used to forge new stuff at the blacksmith, which is turned into a permanent inventory item. And these can be used at any time, and they can also be given to someone for an appropriate quest that either gives you completion in the form of more mithril bricks or red bricks, which have useful and silly extras. The inventory system again gives most characters a little more to do, although levels are much less focused on obtaining items this time around as the cast is already so packed. The open world hasn't changed much, with the same kind of stuff in place. During the story, it railroads you pretty hard level to level, but after it becomes a pretty open area with mithril bricks and characters to find, and the same kind of quests as Lord of the Rings, delivering the proper item or an occasional kill some dudes thing with a few more interesting ones here and there. The quests have a baffling new issue that was much less prevalent in LEGO Lord of the Rings. Nobody ever shuts the hell up. A lot of quests have intros that reach nearly a minute and outros almost as long, usually played back to back immediately, as you often already have the item you need to turn in, and even if not, most quests only take 2 or 3 minutes themselves, so it ends up doubling the length of most quests and makes the game feel extremely slow and tedious as you grind towards the end. Crafting is also muddled some, as now resources are in the picture, with a dozen odd different resources that are dropped from destroying their related objects, like trees and plants dropping wood and stones dropping stones, sometimes some differently colored gems. And beyond being spent at the blacksmiths, these are also used for super builds, carried over from the LEGO movie game, where the right pieces need to be selected to build a larger structure for progression, which is fairly frequent in levels and pops up occasionally in the open world. Most of the character types from LEGO The Lord of the Rings are brought over, although some new ones exist too. Shorties come back, of course, as do axe guys who can break crack walls, wizards who can build magical objects, light dark areas, or light up magical orbs by shooting them. There's strong guys, big guys, bombs can destroy silver, arrows can be used to shoot distant stuff or make poles that elves can swing on, in addition to elves all having the ability to walk on narrow ropes. Fishing can be used in a few spots to get items. Bilbo has the ring and can turn invisible and build invisible objects while he's doing so. Gollum, orcs, and goblins can climb certain walls. Shovels dig, and I think that's all the returning stuff. In addition to this, certain characters, basically arbitrarily, can do team-ups with other characters, which change their movesets and allow them to work together to smash big walls or damage certain enemies like trolls. The rope has been upgraded into a chain. It can still be used to climb, swing, and pull things down, but also has use in combat. The slingshot is a worse bow that can only hit certain targets. Radagast can cure animals of blight, which causes them to aid you in some way afterwards. Certain evil characters can interact with objects that are covered in dark magic. Pickaxes can break open rocks that have gems in them. Hammers can be used to move giant objects in context-sensitive situations, to make platforms, or sometimes rearrange stuff for a puzzle. And certain pole weapons, like spears and hammers, allow the doors to stack on top of each other to form an impromptu ladder in context-sensitive areas. So needless to say, the variety for characters is fairly good all around, especially as most characters, all in the case of the main cast, have several of these attributes stacked on top of each other, and everyone but Gandalf is small, so I guess shorties are in nice supply. Level quality is some of the highest the games have had in a while. I'd generally place them in line with LEGO Star Wars 3, however the game is held back some by its open world. While it still has tons of the charm of the LEGO Lord of the Rings game, in its scale and in its look especially, it's held back by some tedious extra grinding from the resource system and extra lengthy dialogue for quests, which really drags the game down as you get towards the end, as I said. LEGO The Hobbit is a sharp step up in visuals in general. Despite coming to the PS3 and 360, it feels much more like a proper Xbox One game, while the others have felt like a kind of in-between, especially in the lighting and shading department, and especially with regards to how it changes between day and night. And even on the Xbox One proper, it runs pretty flawlessly, so I'm sure it does pretty well on backwards compatibility too. Textures can still be a bit weak, but character models and animations remain really strong. I can't tell which dwarf is which, honestly, most of the time, but there is an attempt to display a bit of personality in each one, and the characters look smoother and more natural than ever. The adorable miniaturized world of Middle-earth is still just as charming as it was before, although several of my favorite areas like Mount Doom and Isengard are absent for obvious reasons, although the other areas in the game that replace them are equally charming. While a lot of the game is the same, Middle-earth has seen a lot of reworks in old areas too, even the kind of in-between ones, which are much more detailed, with rivers, a little more elevation, cliffs and hills, and a variety of small caves with mini-challenges for silver bricks to explore, which are a fun new addition. Like LEGO Lord of the Rings, the cutscenes, which are as well animated as ever, use the dialogue from the movie, which as before, I really like, as it refocuses the cutscenes on visual gags and makes the production quality feel extremely high. And on top of that, Christopher Lee provides the game's narration, which connects various story elements, and as could be expected of him, is absolutely fantastic, because of course it would be. It's also worth noting that this game uses dialogue in a few of the levels in certain places, especially in the Smaug scene, where characters will talk back and forth in the levels, which makes them feel a little more lively as well. As adaptations, the game is ridiculously accurate. However, the movies have so much going on that it's hard to say it isn't warranted, and very few of each movie's 8 levels feels like filler, although there definitely is a little shoved in there. An Unexpected Journey is obviously more low-key, starting with the flashback of the dwarves finding the Arkenstone, which is a combatless level focused largely on being a tutorial for some of the dwarf-centric abilities, which I suppose is kinda nice because there's like 8 million of them, like mining the hammer, and with a cute little finale as Smaug the dragon destroys their home, which is a bit of excitement to start off on, even if it is just a little chase sequence. The dwarves meeting at Bilbo's house is almost certainly the most fillery this game gets. To be fair, it's a scene in which not a lot actually happens, but smashing up Bilbo's house in a really mediocre rhythm game section that goes on way too long doesn't exactly get you pumped up to go back to it. The Azog flashback is turned into a boss fight, but pretty much all the bosses in this game are basically reduced to QuickTime events, which is super lame, and the puzzle between the QuickTime events is just chasing his dumbass down by knocking blocks around with the hammer. I really do miss real bosses as much as they are often just button mashers, but there's a couple in this game that come a little closer. The trolls get fairly well done. The scene in the book and movie is a lot of talking, but the game fluffs it out by giving you different characters to use in a few small puzzle segments, which works really well for the tone of the scene and is refreshing for how much every other level is a character clusterfuck. The Trolls Horde plays out pretty simply as a little puzzle section, but eventually introduces Radagast as another piece of the character overflow, and also leads into one of the few alternate gameplay segments, with one player controlling Radagast on his sled as he fights the Warg Riders, which is a nice little set piece to start the more action-focused tail end of the movie on. The stone giants, like the movie, are kind of the best part. A little asymmetric segment to start off with, which I always enjoy, and a great set piece with climbing the giants, who twist and turn, lurch, throw punches, pass move as the giants do. It's not like it's completely freeform or anything, they only move at certain points, but it does an excellent job of selling the scale of the scene and is a pretty exciting moment all around. The goblin tunnels are almost salvaged in the game too. The level is split into a number of tiny segments featuring and using 2 or 3 characters, and swaps between them very frequently, bringing a constant freshness to the level, and it ends in an okay boss fight against the Goblin King, which is a rarity for this game, which utilizes several mechanics to harm him, like shooting targets with arrows or magic, while fighting him in a cluttered room brimming with enemies, and it's all fairly satisfying. The Bilbo and Gollum segments that's tied to this level is... the scene itself is 2 dudes talking in a dark hole, and it's turned into a fairly basic puzzle segment, with player 2 controlling a brain-damaged goblin because, what else are you gonna do? Honestly, the level would have been even stronger if it just focused on the Goblin Town stuff and made the, Bilbo and Gollum segment a cutscene, maybe? Is that a little sacrilege to just say, don't play as Bilbo for the back half of the game? I don't know. As for the big finale, you climb some trees, play through a way too long segment where you throw exploding pine cones at the wargs, which is just point and shoot. It has basically no tension as you're kind of just sitting up completely safe and aiming the reticle and clicking. And, they can't really get to you. There's no stress or tension. And then, like the movie... An unexpected journey kind of just slams into an ending. It's just kind of over there, the eagles pick you up, and it's on to the next one. Then just as suddenly, the Desolation of Smaug loops back to a more mellow beginning, although it quickly devolves into kind of a shit show. Bjorn's house is a brief chase and a lengthy bit of puzzles, which then abruptly ends because polite conversation with the bear man doesn't make for a great game. Then there's the barrels, the worst part of the movie by far. It's fine. It's a fairly fun action segment for the first 60% of it, although when it actually gets to the barrels, they're kind of a slog. The river's really slow and most of it is just quick time events and it just loops and loops until you beat them, but I suppose any mix-up is somewhat appreciable and the archery segment at the end is kind of neat too. The journey to Lake Town is quickly abridged, and it's on to the Lake Town Armory, which is just a bit of basic puzzling until a fight with that ugly orc, whose name I don't know, which is a quick time event, as most of the bosses are, unfortunately. As with the movie, the game then jumps to the stupid adventures of Gandalf and Radagast as they fight the necromancer that definitely isn't Sauron. They're honestly not bad levels, although 2 in a row might be a little bit much for the variety. The first is fairly straightforward, but I like the dark atmosphere and the climbs on tight ledges, which are a very different mood than the usual in this game. The second is basically more of that until a bad Azog fight, then an okay Sauron fight. His magic being represented as a ton of mini pieces that are thrown around as giant balls of magic is fairly cool visually, and the wizards can shield against them to keep from getting killed, which is a bit more actually gamey and mechanic-y than these bosses usually are, all while building a few pieces to interact with the boss. The journey up the mountain is a last chill level featuring most of the dwarves and some light puzzle solving, and then the game reaches a surprisingly solid finale inside of the Lonely Mountain, which kind of goes all over the place to end the game as strongly as you could for a game that kind of ends its story at the 2/3 mark, with a slow stealth segment featuring Bilbo's talk with Smaug that retains most of Benedict Cumberbatch's pretty good dialogue as the dragon, before transitioning into a quick flurry of puzzles to defeat the dragon, temporarily as it flies away to wreck Lake Town. And that's it. The DLC was cancelled. The game ends on a cliffhanger as ridiculous as the movies, but at least that bad cliffhanger got paid off badly eventually. And it's very fucking weird and abrupt, honestly. The game squeezes 8 levels out of each movie, so it doesn't feel excessively short or anything. If anything, it's probably a little bit longer than average. But narratively, it's weird as hell to just drop off mid-scene and never get any kind of conclusion. In its place, though, we get the bonus level, which I'm fairly sure is just called bonus level. It's an extraordinarily brief Lego city where you play as the stone giants and need to collect 1 million studs in 5 minutes, which is way easier than it sounds, as you kinda just stomp on extremely cute, tiny models of locations from the movie and get about 100k every 30 seconds. It's got a nice weight and presentation, and honestly with Lego cities, I'll take easy over tedious. I suppose that kind of just leaves the movies themselves. Quite a dreadful bunch. Maybe blackmailing Peter Jackson into making them months before shooting began and leaving no time for pre-production was a bad idea. An Unexpected Journey is the most tolerable of the films. Not great, but the early half has a vague resemblance to Fellowship. It's comfy and light and whimsical, although a lot of the charm is undercut by a lot of obvious fakery. CGI is easy and cheap, and studios push it, and even in the simple Shire, it's quite prevalent, and it only gets worse. A lot of people blame the fact that the movie was shot in 48 frames per second for this phenomenon, as that was a big marketing point for the movie, but the simple truth is that the high frame rate looks good. Just look at Avatar 2. This movie just looks fucking awful and fake, and there's like weird, waxy filters over everything, and it still looks fucking awful at 24 frames a second. There are bits I really like, specifically parts that are pretty much taken word for word from the book. The trolls are hideous, not in the way they're supposed to be, but in the way that they look like cheap CGI. But it's one of my favorite portions of the book. Witty, clever, funny, and making the trolls exceptionally British is very funny to me. And unsurprisingly, Bilbo and Gollum's riddle game is exceptionally well done. I also think Martin Freeman is a fantastic Bilbo, which helps. He has the perfect awkward stuffiness to be Bilbo at the start of the story, and it's fun watching him open up and become more carefree as it goes on. The dwarves are a mess. Yeah, the book has a whole pile of them, but the book doesn't also care to expand them much. They're kind of treated as one entity who are a background in Bilbo's story. In this movie, they have to be crammed into every scene, so every shot is just crowded with them all standing around doing nothing, looking silly. And it brings way more attention to the fact that they're not really characters, they're kind of just a plot device. Plus, when you're reading something, you get to see their names over and over when they are relevant, so it becomes a little easier to attach actions and events to them. This movie has 13 dwarves, and 11 of them are essentially featured extras in hilariously overdone makeup to make them look like cartoons, while the remaining 2 are normal-looking, attractive men who look like JCPenney models that they CGI'd to be short. And those 2 are unsurprisingly Thorin, the main one, and Killy or Feely, I don't remember which. The one that gets the horrible love triangle in the next movie. It's pretty dreadful. Also of note is Azog, a character essentially created for the movie. He had a passing mention in the book as the Great Orc who killed Thorin's father, and that's all he is. He's out of the story from there. But here he's a sort of overarching antagonist for the trilogy, in the form of a horrible-looking CGI cartoon orc with, like, pearl white skin and blue eyes to make him really stand out as fake. And it's kind of hard not to be embarrassed as he's shoehorned in for the horrendous action set pieces that really, really do not fit the comfortable, laid-back fairy tale essence of the original book. And it's a short book, too, a comfortable weekend read that began life as a bedtime story for Tolkien's son, not a titanic epic, so being split into 3 movies to have parity with the original trilogy, to buy time for the production to catch up on an extremely rushed schedule, to give Warner Bros. More money is pretty comical. Especially when it comes time for the movie to end in a mediocre action scene before just kinda rolling into a to be continued. The Desolation of Smaug is, in contrast, a terrible movie with a few good elements. The movie essentially runs up to the end of the book, but has one of the most deranged cliffhangers you could make, just so that the third movie can adapt like 10 pages of a children's novel into something feature-length, basically to ensure the money could keep flowing. This movie is padded to hell and back with a massively extended sequence with the elves where the dwarves get captured, meet Orlando Bloom from The Lord of the Rings, not because he fits in the story or was there in the book, but because you remember him, and he's joined by Kate from Lost, who has a tremendously bad love triangle with Orlando Bloom and Keely or Feely, I don't remember which drags on and on even into the next movie and exists mainly to justify why 2 of the dwarves are handsome looking men. It's fucking embarrassing. And the barrel sequence is somehow even more so, a dreadful 15 minutes of bad GoPro shots with noticeable artifacting, Orlando and Kate doing backflips on the dwarves' heads like a cartoon to shoot orcs, the fat dwarf rolls down a hill and turns into a spinning barrel of death like a fucking Looney Tune. It just never fucking ends. It's far from the only embarrassing element either, especially when it comes to Lake Town, which is handled decently for the most part, but undercut by Alfred, a very, very movie original character who serves as the comic relief sidekick to the evil mayor of Lake Town. Usually by looking fucking stupid and being greedy, although his shtick is largely saved for the third movie. There's also the Gandalf stuff, which is also movie original, surprise surprise, where he shits about with Radagast to fight the Necromancer, and it's obviously fucking Sauron. Yet despite seeing Sauron come back to life with his own eyes, and more or less knowing Bilbo has the ring, he does nothing about it beyond getting in another terrible CGI fight scene, where him and some elves and Radagast and Saruman punch ghosts, and Elwyn's there and does the scream thing, and they punch ghosts, and they have like bad Marvel quips, and it looks like a fucking video game. It's goddamn tremendously bad. It's a shame too, because when the movie is, adapting the book it's supposed to be adapting instead of just making up bad fan fiction, as all the shit I just highlighted was, it's fairly good. Benedict Cumberbatch is fantastic as Smaug, and much of the dialogue between the dragon and Bilbo is intact, clever, fun, and even the chase sequence with the dragon is pretty good, even though it's movie original, simply because it feels much more in line with the book, and it's actually kind of a good thing to end the movie on, and fits a lot better with, the tone and style of the story as opposed to the terrible, laughable fan fiction we've been getting for the past 2 hours. Had the movie cut out all the fan fiction and just been the last one, it would have been on a similar, decent level to the first one, but unfortunately we can't be that lucky. This movie ends on a horrendous cliffhanger as Smaug flies to destroy Lake Town as a cheap, scummy, embarrassing non-ending that serves solely to push the actual ending of this movie back, and force people to see the tremendously bad final movie in order to see what happens. The Battle of Five Armies isn't just comically bad, it's arguably the most cynical and greedy thing ever put in theaters. The first 15 minutes of this movie is just the end of the last one, where we see Bard kill Smaug. Then the movie pivots into being 2 hours of fan fiction, adapting maybe 20 pages of epilogue. The titular Battle of Five Armies is not important in the book. The book is called The Hobbits. It's about a hobbit. And honestly, even if it kept its original title, There and Back Again, it'd still be a story about a stuffy man broadening his horizons, seeing the world. But even after all his adventuring at the end of the story, a battle of greed where the dwarves are dicks to the people of Lake Town, the elves are sick of the dwarves, and some other people show up, which I'm fairly sure the book never specifies who the Five Armies actually are, is so outside of Bilbo's interest and understanding that he and Gandalf just sit the battle out. The battle is so far beneath Gandalf, and nobody wants to be involved. Everyone thinks it's dumb. It's dumb. The battle is stupid. The reasons for the battle are stupid. That's the point. The reason the book skims it is because the battle is stupid. It's a dumb battle over greed. Hobbits are too simple to care. Wizards are too above all that to care. And everyone just wants to fucking go home. And in the book, Bilbo even gets knocked out and misses the whole thing, and then they can just go home uneventfully because it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. The movie does not need to be 2 hours of this. This movie is a nightmare. It's 2 hours of cartoons fighting each other. I don't even know what to say about it. The elves show up on cartoon deer, the humans join them to yell at the dwarves. Kate from Lost and Orlando Bloom discover an army of CGI orcs led by Azog, the CGI orc, and his son, who's a CGI orc. But Azog is also led by CGI bats, and those CGI bats are led by a CGI Sauron, and there's a group of other CGI dwarves who show up on CGI pigs, and that's all taking place on CGI rocks. It's a fucking nightmare. It's a fucking video game. It all looks terrible. It has no consequence. It's insanity. The only breaks from this shitfest are, of course, the exciting conclusion to the Necromancer storyline, which takes place towards the start. And by exciting, I mean terrible, because it's the part where Gandalf and the others punch a bunch of ghosts. And then, as the movie goes on, the breaks we get are Alfred shenanigans. Alfred puts coins in his boobies to try to escape with money. Alfred gets launched from a catapult. Alfred steals money. Alfred fucking shenanigans. A good portion of this movie is taken up by Alfred fucking shenanigans. Nothing here matters. It's not relevant. It's painful to suffer through. It's completely fucking exhausting. The Battle of Five Armies is so deep-fried, so stupid. It's unbelievable that it was released. It's frankly unbelievable. Just maybe Traveler's Tales made the right call ending The Hobbit where they did. I fucking wish Warner Bros. Had. Lego The Hobbit works really well as more Lego The Lord of the Rings. Funny because the movies sure don't. Its overworld is more the same, just made a little bit more tedious thanks to the kind of awkward resource grind and way too much dialogue for every random quest giver. But once you get the ability to buy any resource, it becomes a little more bearable. The levels are actually stronger than the LEGO Lord of the Rings, I think. They're pretty top tier with a really good blend of chill exploratory levels, some fun action set pieces, and a great use of dialogue from the movies throughout, which is fantastic, especially when it comes to Smaug. Being cut short is awkward. Warner Bros. Saying no to having an ending is insane and embarrassing. But the content that is here, and the fact that they made 8 levels for each movie, it's hard to complain. It's all really solid beyond the lack of an ending. It still feels like a full game, and quite a high quality one at that. It may be 2/3 of a game, but it's a damn fine 2/3 of a game.